Welcome to the Miles Zen Podcast. I am so glad you found us today. Today we have such a fabulous guest. We are speaking with the Mayor of Sturgeon County, Alanna Hnatiw. And for anyone who doesn't know, Sturgeon County is just outside of Edmonton in the province of Alberta, Canada. We cover a lot of ground in this discussion. Life journeys, expectations, how people give feedback, anger, joy, how to listen to what's underneath. And she shares some of her life's journey and lessons with us. We are so fortunate to be able to have this person on our podcast who was leading what you'd call a dream life, doing yoga, spending time with horses, and put that on the back burner to be of service to her community. Mayor Hnatiw was elected in 2017, and she's approaching a third election in October. A former small business owner in the oil and gas industry, she focused on environmental stewardship and safety, and she's also a former yoga and equestrian teacher. She lives on a farm with her husband, and she's also a mom. And I think that this conversation should be a script for all mayors and future mayors on how to be human, how to be humble, how to show up and be open to possibilities and lead your best life. It's that good. We met because of her work in the hydrogen industry, and she was named Hydrogen Leader of the Year in 2023. She is living proof that your life can change at any age. You can learn new things, you can change your perspectives, and you can live your best life. She's also a dream guest because she quoted some of my recent episodes during our interview. Now, how cool is that? I felt so uplifted after this conversation. I know you will feel the same way too. So we are going to just jump in. And really, it's like you are going to jump into the middle of this conversation, which feels like a coffee date, but I really don't want you to miss anything. So we jump right into our pre-chat that just morphs into the rest of the podcast. I hope you enjoy.
I just was listening to your last podcast with Ruth, the coach, and I was just struck because it sounds like you both are living in my head. That's like the same, it was just, it spoke to me very, very clear, resonating.
Oh, that's awesome. It's so funny because I try to treat all my podcasts like we're having just a chat, like we're having a conversation, and it's less like a interview and you're kind of joining in for a cup of coffee. Me too.
It did. It felt like a great chat, but it was just full of a lot of wisdom. And I think just spoke to, I don't know, maybe it's the season of life we're in and kind of the wisdom you start to find. Yeah, it was very spot on.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. Isn't it amazing how this season, it's almost like the doorway, soon as you pass 50, you're just, and I'm guessing you're with me.
Oh yes, I'm past you. I'm almost walking through the other door.
Well, you're the poster child for walking through the other door. But you do start to gather this wisdom and things just line up. I mean, you still life, right? So life is still lifing all around you, but it's like you've got more tools in your toolkit now to deal with them, and they don't hit you like a freight train.
I think and then maybe it's just because you start to deal with the mortality of friends and parents, you just start to realize as well, I'm past middle age. Like I have a finite number of years left. So no more effing around. Things are getting real. And what am I willing to compromise on? What am I willing to leave behind? it's more around legacy. And anytime you, I think, start to really become distilling down your values, what matters, what you want to accomplish, you start to become more, critical or about the things around you. But, as Ruth was saying, you also project onto other people. So, I learned a little bit of that through my yoga journey as well. But there's maybe, and it's also just a point of my career, there's a desire for accountability. But that accountability isn't just for the people in my orbit. It's also accountability for me. So if I'm looking at the things that I'm becoming intolerant of, or that I find are too much of a compromise or too uncomfortable, what does that say about what I'm bringing to that equation?
Yeah.
Because that's really the only thing I can change. That's what I'm ultimately responsible for, is myself and how I show up, the weather I bring. And so you start to
I love that.
Yeah,
the weather I bring.
Yeah. Because especially in a world that is literally spinning out of control at a rate that most people can't digest and manage, you just start to, me anyway, I'm really starting to try to figure out where can I influence. And I think even through my job, through the office I have the privilege to hold, I'm still, after 8 years, just starting to understand the influence that office has and that role has, and trying to use that to the highest and best outcome that office can exert, separate from myself as an individual, because that's also something I've wrestled with. As you say, you're a serial people pleaser. Believe it or not, I think anybody in our generation grew up as a young woman. That's just what your role was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how does that work for you? But also trying to stay small sometimes, so that you make sure that other people are comfortable, and always stepping back, not wanting to be, too much, too loud, expecting too much. Then I started to wrestle with, well, that's my personality, but that's not what the office demands. I don't,
Right.
it's
Isn't that
selfish for me
interesting?
to expect, like, yes, that that position is now mine, so I imbue certain of my own characteristics on it. But it's not, there's a responsibility above my comfort zone that office should demand, and that the residents that I serve, I think, expect. And so that's something that I'm working through and have become aware of in the last few years. Yes, maybe I don't want to do that, or yes, maybe I think people don't want to hear from me, but they want to hear from the mayor of Sturgeon County. That's important to them. That office is important to them. It's not about whether you're important, it's about the office you hold.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could remember that. There was a quote recently about that, or somebody, it's not you. It's about that position that they held. And that's who the people needed to see. So get yourself out of the way.
Yes.
Because you signed up for this.
Yes.
And show
Yeah.
up. But how interesting, because you do come in with a lot of energy, and you have this beautiful, have this beautiful energy around you. And I think it's open, and it's attractive to people, and it welcomes people in. But at the same time, there's a core of steel in there, because you wouldn't be doing the job you've done if there wasn't. And I think that it's so important to allow that light that's inside of us to shine out, because when we do, we give everybody else permission to do the same, like Marianne Williamson's poem, or piece of writing. And it must be just tough to juggle what does Alanna need and what does the mayor's seat need. Oh, I love this discussion so much already. But how about why don't we introduce you?
Sure.
And then talk a bit about this journey that you've had. So how about you introduce you, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So Alanna Hnatiw, been the mayor of Sturgeon County for 8 years, was elected in 2017 as a bit of a dark horse. Nobody knew me, hadn't been on council before. and it was the first woman elected to the office in Sturgeon County. My adult life was predominantly spent in the oil and gas service industry. Although I say my experience is an inch deep and a mile wide. I've been a licensed insurance broker. I've worked in retail. I've worked in advertising and marketing. But I also grew up in Saskatchewan. My parents were, fourth generation farmers. I still, my family still farms back there. I just spent the weekend back there with my mom. I'm currently living in Alberta on a farm where my husband and I raised our 2 kids, now an empty nester, and going into the 3rd election in October of this year. I'm running for my 3rd term. And also, just reaching back to the prior comments about my comfort zone and what the office expects and influence and responsibility is also wrapping my head around this is an election and it has been an incredible ride. But if I'm not reelected, just already starting to just make sure I'm not too tangled up in the role, understanding if I don't get reelected, I still am me and I still have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And also a reminder to myself that when I no longer hold that office, the influence that I've been adjusting to will change as well. And so just making sure that I'm not tied in too closely to that is in no way a validation of who I am or what I'm capable of as Alanna.
Right. Yeah, that's a great perspective, because all of us face that in small ways, when we change jobs
Yes.
and change anything in our lives. There's certain things that fall away.
Yes.
And certainly when you've had an influential career or position, it is really funny to see that change. All of a sudden, when nobody wants anything from you anymore, you see who drops off,
Yes.
and
yes.
you see who stays. And and the ones who stay, I mean, it's beautiful.
Yes.
And you're like, wow, they always appreciated me, clearly, for my quirky, weird personality.
Yes.
It's such
Yeah. Yeah.
not calling you quirky and weird, but
Oh, I'm that for sure. But and also just starting to think, I'm committed to winning this next election, but I'm always of the mind that you need to expect the best, but be prepared for the worst potentially. And as I say that, I also challenge myself to not label anything good or bad. And I learned that through, through some of the teachings, Eastern teachings, through yogas, and through Stoicism as well, which is always fascinating to me, just about accepting the experience for what it is and not labeling it or judging it, because in doing so, you'll minimize what you can mine and learn from that experience. So, even if I lose the election, that wouldn't necessarily be a negative thing, because, and I think you said through, maybe it was your interview with Ruth about, we live facing forward, but we learn facing backward, or something to that effect. And often it takes years before you have the perspective to look back and see that certain things that took place were pivotal and weren't always what you thought they were at the time. So just be in them, take as much from them as you can, and stay open to what's coming next. And it was interesting, because when I was first asked to run for this office in 2017, I laughed at first and dismissed it. But when I was asked the second and the third time, and then my family said, this is something that you should definitely consider, it terrified me. And then I had to look at what was I afraid of. But as I was looking about what I was afraid of, the mantra that I had been saying on my mat every day for the last year was that everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. And so when I was so afraid, suddenly I was like, well, then if I've been saying this mantra for a year, and now the reason I don't want to do this is because of this ambiguous fear, then, I have to look at what I'm afraid of. And I have to also ask myself, imagine the worst case scenario. Well, how would that all play out? And would you survive that? And the answer was yes. And also I had to ask myself, could I live with the regret of the what if? If I continue at the time I was teaching yoga full time, I was working to get my certification through the Canadian Equine Federation to become a riding instructor. And that's what I was doing. I was, giving new riders lessons. And that was what I was planning to do for the rest of my life. So, and I searched my soul to come up with that. It came to a point in my life where I was finally making decisions based on what I wanted to do. The kids were of a certain age. My husband no longer needed as much of my help in his business. And so I did a great deal of soul searching and decided yoga and horses. That's going to be the rest of my life.
I love it.
And then to be asked, because I wanted to do finally what I wanted to do, not what other people needed me to do. And then to be asked to run for public office. Suddenly, I was back in, well, is this what I want to do, or is this what other people need me to do?
Yeah.
And so I was really conflicted with whether I was being true to myself to walk through that door and see what if, or whether this was a test and whether I just needed to stick with the path that I had chosen for myself. And I wrestled with that for quite some time. And I would say even after I won and started in the job, I was still wrestling with the path less taken, I guess, or, maybe
imagine.
Yeah.
You were probably sitting in this room going,
what did I just do?
Did I end up here?
And so as people meet you and say like, oh, and what did you do before this? I was teaching yoga. I mean, the dismissive or just kind of the stunned look on people's faces as well. It was like, and then the second question is, and how do you say your last name?
Right? Yeah, I certainly had that. I remember when I met you, and I probably went through the normal thing that the normal chat and what you do before. And as soon as you said that, I was like, this is my person. This person is amazing. Look how she goes from this to all of a sudden this. And it would be perceived as entirely different. And I don't think it is. And even though I've tried many times to do yoga, sometimes with various levels of success. So I'm not a yogi by any stretch of the imagination, but I sure appreciate some of the things that yoga brings to the table. And so for me, I was like, oh, wow, Sturgeon County is going to have a very well-rounded mentally mare.
Yes.
And I thought that was the coolest thing. Maybe you can talk to us about how did you decide to get into yoga in the first place? Yep. I know that you've had a variety of other jobs before that. I can relate to a lot of those. And then what was it that brought you into yoga?
Yeah. So I wasn't sure what to do. I was being pulled in directions, again, based on what I could do for other people, what they needed for me, talents I had that worked for them. And when I started thinking about getting higher order of education to help in that work that I was in at the time, I realized that I didn't actually care enough about even though I was good at it, it actually just wasn't important enough for me to think about spending time or money to refine. And so then I thought, okay, if all expectations aside, or even, if money didn't matter, if there was no limitations.
I love that exercise. The money didn't matter exercise.
Yeah. What would I do if I could just pick in my wildest dreams what I want to do for the rest of my life? And it was horses. That's always been something I've just loved. As a child growing up, I just did everything I could do to be around them. Even though we lived in a rural community, my parents were not fans of horses. I never had one as a child. So I would stay, summers at my aunt's or get out to my friends as often as I could that had horses. And so I thought, that's something I know that will just fill my cup for the rest of my life. And then I thought, well, that is physically grueling and demanding work. And so what could I do to get strong enough and centered enough and balanced enough to be able to endure that kind of a lifestyle.
Oh.
And then I thought, well, yoga is probably the best. Not if the gyms are fine, but that's just not the scene that I thought I would do until I was, say, 80. But I knew yoga practice was something I could do for the rest of my life. And then I also know my weaknesses and lack of discipline on some things. And I thought, what are the odds of me showing up to yoga on the regular for the rest of my life, even just for myself? And then I knew I probably would maybe let myself down unless I was teaching it and I had to be there. That would be because I would have a commitment to other people that I would have to show up.
I love that.
And
it's like you're in my head. This is so now I guess I have to teach yoga in order to go to yoga class, because then with the commitment, I show up. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. But if it's just
for me,
I can do it tomorrow.
Yeah. Or later, or some other, something else is more important than me.
Yeah.
And so I took my yoga teacher training and met some lovely people I'm still in touch with. But I was one of the few out of, I think there was 20 of us that took that class. Only a couple of us actually moved into teaching. And, 5 years down the road, I was one of the few that was still teaching. I ended up teaching at the place where I took my training, and I taught in Edmonton and St. Albert and here in Morinville. And even actually after I was elected, there's a bit of people were, wanting to get to know me, but in an elected office, there's this divide between administration and elected officials, which is kind of a strange space, especially for someone who's involved in small business and very hands-on. And so I started teaching a Wednesday night class just for staff in one of the boardrooms. And I did that for probably a year and a half. Yeah, year and a half. And then COVID hit. And then I started just going to the boardroom and doing it on the video, which is, for, namaste yoga teachers who provide digital mediums for teaching, because it's very difficult. I miss that connection and the feedback with people in the room. Mm-hmm. And I'm always love to check in on people as well. In the Hatha lineage, it's all about form and making sure that there's no injury and people are holding themselves right and giving them cues. And so all of those things just weren't working digitally. And I haven't gotten back into it post-COVID, although I've had staff recently come up and say, some of them remember the classes, some of them are new and say, hey, we heard you used to teach class, would you do that again? So if I get this next term, I think it's something I owe to myself and to the corporation and to the culture and to the community there to think about doing that again, just to hold that space, just to connect and be a person, not just a figurehead. Right. That again, the position and the influence has this kind of a lot of assumptions around it. Yeah. And so when people can just get into a room and connect and talk about, get in their bodies and out of their heads a little bit, and get to just talk with me one-on-one, it changes. I think it just changes the weather.
Well, it does. Yeah, you bring more of your whole self into that space. And even if you did bring your whole self into all the spaces, it's so hard for people to see, just depending on their perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And so if they're sitting in the yoga class with you, then their perspective changes.
Yes.
And you could be that exact same person, but what you're doing is allowing a shift of perspective for others, which is cool.
And I think in this public office, people just see a piece of you and they make a lot of assumptions. And when people get to know me, usually they figure out a lot of the assumptions they were making were very wrong.
Right.
And I'd say that's kind of one of the challenges of public office, especially nowadays with all of their polarizing topics that we're wrestling with, and social media, and how people take their toxic lives and their toxic inner dialogue and basically puke it out on a keyboard and throw it all over other people. That can be hard to be the recipient of that. especially when they are just so wrong about who I am as a person. But
it's got to hurt. So how do you deal with that, with those keyboard warriors?
well, I used to really struggle to not engage and try to, defend myself. But I saw a quote, I think it was Muhammad Ali actually, which is interesting. And somebody was criticizing him in one of his points in life, and he just wasn't responding to it. And a reporter asked him, why aren't you defending yourself? And he said something to the effect of, any dog can bark at the moon, but imagine the dog that gets the moon to bark back, And so I've thought, now when I see certain things, I think, is this deserving of me barking back?
Right.
Because this person isn't, and it's usually, they're just acting out from a place of fear. And so I've started to also just think about, it's got to be hard to be them. If that's actually what they think of me, or that's what they think of, that's how they're approaching their life, or then it's really got to be hard to be them and be around them. And that's sad, but I also have to disengage from that kind of poison, because that it's hard to not internalize that. And so the more you see it, the more it can seep in. So I minimize how often I look at those comments now. And I also just remind myself, like most things, the people that do know me aren't the ones that are on there anyway, aren't reading that. And it's just not, it's not valid. It gives me sometimes some insight to maybe the larger thing of what they're afraid of. And there's information in that.
Yeah.
And I try to just look at it like that. I try to detach and understand that it's more a situation where they're afraid of and they're angry about.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be projected onto me, but that they don't actually know me.
Yeah.
And
and most underneath most anger is
fear.
Hurt and fear.
Yeah.
And and it's been trained in society that that's an acceptable way to respond. It's okay to be angry, but it's more judged if you're sad or scared. And
or even passionate. I've even, with my kids, watching movies when they were younger, our society seemed to be more comfortable with violence than sexuality. And I really questioned myself, like, what kind of indoctrination have I gone through, or am I willing to pass on to my kids, that nudity and sexuality is uncomfortable and needs to be guarded against, but human on human violence is entertaining? Like, how twisted is that?
Epic battle scenes. This is, my son's 14. It feels like all the movies that he loves to watch, and so many of the even really popular movies, all have these epic battle scenes, and they show so much. And now I can't even watch those anymore. I'm just done.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
But it is really interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to examine yourself around that. Why is it okay for him to watch that, but not watch a love scene or somebody half naked? And it is funny. That's interesting. I'm going to examine myself on that. Thanks. My son's going to get cringe city soon.
Yeah. So that's, but, people still do have, I don't want to lose people's message in the crap they've got it wrapped up in.
Yeah.
And so I do try to sometimes just detach from how I'm feeling about what they're saying, or even how they're saying, and say, like, is there a nugget of information or truth here that would serve me to know and to think about and to take into consideration? And it's, I really wish people understood that when they wrap their opinion up in acid, or their view in hatred, it's really, you're making it much more difficult for someone else to actually be able to consume and to understand your perspective. You need to really strip away all of the emotion to a degree, or take some responsibility for it, and think about what the seed, the nugget of information and perspective is that you're trying to convey. And don't drown it in something that's going to make it very difficult for someone else to consume.
That's amazing that you've got that perspective. And I think that that perspective would help not in just being a mayor or in a position in politics, but in everybody's life. So how did you get there to be, how did you get there to be so wise to actually be able to be at that place where you're, for the most part, not taking that stuff in, but looking for the seed? Like, have you always been that way, or did that transition happen as you got older and wiser?
I think maybe I can see myself in those people as well. That's I grew up, I think anger and fear were very big parts of my life. And so for a lot of my life, I've communicated through those emotions and those languages, but I still had valid things to say. I just didn't know how to say them the right way. And I think that's how a lot of people live. And so I also know there's so much I don't know. And I do believe that different perspectives, I mean, I'm so blown away how culture and language literally have us thinking and feeling differently. I grew up with the assumption that, my perspective was the world perspective.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was much older that I realized different languages create a whole different neurosynapses for people. You can't have the same opinion necessarily or the same experience, even if you've gone through a similar activity, because you're just wired so differently from your culture and from your family of origin experience. So I just know that there's so much I don't know. And so I always want to take in as much information as I can to try to come up with the very best solution and the very best outcome without getting too hung up on how the information was packaged. Because I think there's been times in my life where I've had something to say, but maybe I didn't know how to share it in the right way. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that happens to so many of us. I can just even think of in management team meetings. I've got something to say, but I don't know how to package it in a way that's going to be not offensive or be able to be heard, or, you're going through all these internal dialogues. But you still have that thing that you want to get across and you're stopped. And I don't know about you, but I found just growing up, so I had my sort of my little world, which was largely informed by my parents and their beliefs. And then I went off to university and my world exploded in that I just got all these new ways of looking at things. And all of a sudden I realized that the truths that were true for my parents didn't need to be true for me. And I could look at things in such a different way. But I find that with most things, as we learn more, we learn how much we don't know. And
the more you know, the more you don't know.
Exactly. And I just love that. And that was such a shocker for me to realize just how much I didn't know. And when you're confined and the people around you are all reflecting the same opinions, it's so hard to realize that you don't know. And then I find in society there's that safety with that group and the group think. And as soon as you go out of the group think, you're judged. Yeah. And it's so funny. The more you have different experiences, the more you travel, the more you talk to people you wouldn't normally talk to, that all of a sudden you're like, oh, this doesn't fit with my worldview. What am I going to do with this? Are you going to let it in? Or
is it valid? Is it, there's varying degrees of validity, but I just always, and staff know this when I'm asking for briefing notes on things, I just always want as much information as possible because I know there's just so much out there that I don't know. And don't want to miss out on something that needs to be considered.
Yeah. And so how do you deal with finding, I guess, I mean, maybe you've already just said it, but hearing from those voices that are quieter?
Well, that's hard because you often have to seek them out. And I found this this was my experience when I was on school council. And I was always trying to recruit people. Like, you need to come in. We'd love to have your perspective. And maybe this is just a female thing, but they just said, well, I have nothing to offer. I can't go sit in there with teachers or superintendents. And I don't know enough. And I said, you're a mother and a parent of a child in this school. That is all that you need to qualify you for a seat at that table. But I think so many women, especially, are suffering from imposter syndrome. And I certainly have had that my whole life and still have that. And I'm getting to the age now where, the fact that I'm here is proof that I have a right to be here because I've lived long enough to have these experiences. And I've been voted by my peers in my community to speak on their behalfs. Therefore, I have a right to be at this table and have this conversation. But so many people feel like they don't, so many people over assume that they have all the facts. And then there's also a larger group of people that don't feel that they're valid enough to actually contribute. And that's the really unfortunate part because their experience and their input is just as important. And it is harder to draw it out, which is why I love getting out in community and going to events and having those one-on-one conversations because you learn so much. And there's times, depending on the day, I mean, I'm actually an introvert. I love just hanging out on the farm by myself or going for walks and I sometimes have to push myself to go to those public events, especially if it's at the end of an 8 or 9 hour workday. Yeah. There's still something that night or on the weekend. But I know I have to go because I know when I'm there, I'm going to love every interaction I have because there's just so much value. And every time I leave, even if it's at the end of it, like last night, at the end of a 12-hour day, when I got home, I was like, I'm so glad I went to that. Because that's where you have to go to have those conversations with people to learn from them. And that's what I love about this is the flexibility in the job to be able to go from a boardroom to a meeting, to a field, to a job site, to a park, and just have these really rich conversations in all those places with just this wide variety of people.
Yeah.
I used to get bored pretty much every 3 to 5 years. I switched jobs. Because I would just either by circumstance or by my own unrest, that was just a cycle I noticed in myself that seemed to be true. And so these are 4-year terms. So when I got elected, I'm like, oh, this is either going to be hell for 4 years because I'll be there, But this is just the variety in this job and just this stretch that this has been for me has been very invigorating. And there's been no boredom at all.
No kidding. And
8 years in.
Yeah. And I think of also your role, and this is how we met through the hydrogen conference in Edmonton. Your role is the chair of are you still the chair of the hydrogen?
No. So I was the chair of the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub for about four years. And then the second mandate, the second funding round, kind of Hub 2.0 has similar partners, some additional partners and different leadership structure now. So now I, the founding chair, but no longer the chair, still a champion. And I'm sitting on the Alberta executive of the Hydrogen Association. So the Canadian Hydrogen Association has these umbrella provincial associations. And I was just voted onto the board of the Alberta chapter last month. So I still have, work there that I'm, advocating and championing and learning. And Sturgeon County is also undertaking the decarbonization of their municipal fleets through some pilot projects as well, trying to find a way for there to be a rural way to decarbonize as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So just for me, I mean, I know when I got into the hydrogen industry, when it was hydrogen fuel cell stuff, I had very little science background. I decided I was a tree hugger that liked technology. And I was always smart enough, but I never gave myself the credit for it. And I had this mind shift that was like, no, you can figure it out. But I would go to these conferences and I would sit there and I'd be like, I understood maybe 5% of that chat. And at some point, I would just start planning my future vacations in the back because it was just so over my head. And then I would get to the point of, don't tune out. You may understand only 5% this time, but next time you'll understand 10%. And then I see where my journey led me. And I realized my value in those meetings, even if I didn't have the depth of being an engineer. And so how was that journey for you in hydrogen? Because I can only imagine, based on what I went through, how that would be for a non-engineer.
Yeah. I certainly wished I would have spent paid more attention in my chemistry and physics classes. I mean, and back to kind of imposter syndrome, out of high school, I went to career college for some administrative training and then got my licenses in the insurance business for accident and life insurance or commercial, personal lines, all of those things. So, no degrees in science or politics or anything else. And so, yeah, talk about imposter syndrome, sitting in these rooms with engineers and people who just have, decades of professional education and thinking, what do I have to offer here? And I had this desire to, I basically need to study and have a crash course in physics and chemistry to be able to memorize and know and understand everything I'm hearing. And then I thought, this is just one small part of my job. And as fascinating as this is, I still need to worry about land use planning and the ag markets and building codes and healthcare and safe communities. And so I had to become...
Well, it represents an entire community
Yes.
at the same time.
Yeah. Like this, I can't let this kind of side work that I've happened upon, because of this role consume so much of my time. Although it is very fascinating to me, I'm going to have to stay a generalist. And I'm going to just play to the strengths I have, which is being able to take in a lot of different information and to synthesize it and to try to see connections and see the big picture. And so I just have to keep reminding myself, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a physicist. And it's interesting because even the engineers don't agree. So why am I trying to understand this so that I can defend a position when people who have made a 50-year career in this don't agree on the thermodynamics and the energy of transitioning a molecule from a fossil fuel into a hydrogen gas? So I decided I'm not being realistic. So it was a stretch, and I did a lot of reading and a lot of self-criticism about, I should have, gone to school. I should have learned more, but these weren't things I was interested in. Yeah. But these weren't things I was interested in anyway. Just bringing my skill set of being able to, I see myself as an interpreter. Because I can listen to what people are saying, and then I can understand the general concept and then build analogies to take it to the Reader's Digest version.
Right.
To explain it so that lay people can understand it, probably in a way that would be cringy for engineers who might see it slightly differently. And I think that's what I bring to the table, is being able to understand how it all fits together.
Well, yeah, because it still needs to resonate with the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And
Which is who I represent. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't understand it, how's there hope for anybody else to understand it and have it show up in their communities?
Yeah. Yeah. And to also just continue to always question. I never want to be drinking any Kool-Aid. I do believe it's important to be skeptical about most things. And so I think I also bring that to the table, is explain to me how that's actually going to work. Because if you can't explain it to me, or I often find myself, apologizing and then questioning whether this is actually, does this still work? Because conditions change, circumstances change. And, we're seeing this with a very contentious item in Sturgeon right now around land use planning and development. You make decisions and put one foot in front of the other, but like all pathways, the further you get along, the conditions on the ground change. Mm-hmm. And so you have to change with that to be able to continue to move forward and adapt. And so I'm a highly adaptable person. And so I always just kind of want to push the conversation about, yes, this is the path we started on, but is this still the right path? What conditions have changed? And without, I heard something the other day, you have a right to the process, but you don't have a right to the outcome. And this is something I struggle with is, often you're told in this goal-oriented world, pick your goal and then execute, go for that. But then you're not leaving room for what you're learning along the way. You have to be able to adapt and shift. And so, yes, there is a process, but I don't want to presuppose the outcome, because then I'm going to lose the opportunity and the responsibility of adapting to the information and to the circumstances that change along the way.
And you might then actually rule out a better outcome.
Exactly. And back to some of I think it was the comment on your interview with Ruth about if you become too narrow, you lose out on those other opportunities of learning, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So, just as when I walked through the door of elected office, I didn't have any expectations at all. And so look where it's taken me. And even through this next election, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do trust that I'm going to show up in it, whatever it is. And I'm going to bring the same energy that I bring to every situation. So I'm just going to trust that it's going to be the right thing at the right time, because I'm going to show up and make it that way.
Well, and I love that you're a skeptic with an open mind. And I heard this saying that true skepticism requires an open mind.
Yes.
And so that I think is just so great. And I can remember you showing up in these conferences, and your message, whichever message it was that you'd be delivering, was so much easier to hear. And I always loved going to your talks because it was accessible. I found that the way you bring everybody along in wherever you show up. And so it's a really great way, I think, to be in the world. And at the same time, you're empowering a ton of people. And I remember being super nervous about giving some talks, because I was there, this little person at a 5,000 person or 4,000 person energy conference. And there I was sitting on the stage with these big energy companies and little old me. And I remember finishing that talk, and you and a friend came up and were just super supportive to me. And I was so grateful, because, when you're in the moment, you can't quite remember.
Yes.
And here I am, I'm like, wow, if Alanna can come up and tell me that, then it must not have been a complete failure.
Oh.
And so it really helped give me just a lot of, oh yeah, I can do this. And I think that's what you bring to the table. And I think that's what people are going to leave this discussion with, is that I think that no matter where you go, you inspire people and you encourage people, and your presence is encouraging people to think with an openness, just because of your very position, which is awesome. So there's the you and there's the you in the mayor's chair. And I think it just is one of those things that makes people go, okay.
Well, that was, I think, one of the slogans. And thank you for saying that, by the way. I'm not very good at taking compliments, so I will acknowledge that. Thank you. Leading with an open door and an open mind. And I mean that. I live that. And it's really, it's hard, especially in public office. You make votes, you make decisions, and then people assume that you think a certain way, but I really do have an open mind, and I really do even question my prior decisions sometimes, because I made that decision with the information I had at the time. And if I'm functioning as I expect, I should be learning more every day and potentially even change my mind. And I think that's what people don't understand. But I live in this place of tension, right? Of just always knowing that there are two sides to every story, and you have to try to hold space for both. And that's, I often go into meetings, as I think all elected officials should. Yes, I've read my agenda, and often I've tossed and turned for a few nights wrestling with something, but I'm still going to hear from my peers and be open in that debate, to open to persuasion. That is our job as elected officials in a debate, to be open to persuasion. So if I don't have an open mind, how am I actually going to learn from what my fellow council members have to say, or fellow board members or community members? It's convenient to be able to close your mind and plant your flag.
Yeah.
But that's just not the place I live, because I've changed my mind about a lot of things over time. And I hope to continue to learn and evolve and change my mind for decades to come. I think that's a part of the human experience. This is a really big world full of incredible people and incredible places. And I would hope that we can allow them all to leave some imprints on us.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's almost a fabulous way to wrap up. But I did want to ask, like I ask all my guests, if you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share, because I know that you've shared so many already, and I've just enjoyed this discussion so much.
Yeah, as I was wandering around doing chores this morning, I was like, oh yeah, she's going to ask me for words of wisdom, of which I don't really have much. I think, other than, I guess, just from my personal experience, is it's never too late for anything. Like, I think we sometimes just think too small of ourselves. The world is a big place, and life is a huge blessing. And, squeeze every drop out of it. If something's not working, change it. If something is working, double down on it, and just continue to seek and to learn, and, never settle. That's kind of the path I'm on right now anyway.
I love that. I love it. And I really want to touch base with you again after October, after the election, to see which path you're going down. And either one of them sounds fabulous. And I just can't wait to see how this evolution of you continues, because it's so inspiring. It really is.
That's the thing. Like, if I can do this, whether it was school council or public office or teaching, I feel like anybody can. Like, it's because it's a culmination of yourself and the team around you, your tribe, which changes too. And that's the exciting part, is you never know what's coming. So just show up. Like, isn't that, there's something about, 80% of life is just showing up. And that is absolutely, set fear aside, set your imposter aside, set aside all of that stuff. And for the love of God, please just show up, and show up in your own life.
Right? Show up in your own life. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alanna. I have loved this conversation.
Yes, I've enjoyed it, and I'm going to still continue to dive through your other podcasts because I've found each of them just fascinating to get to know some people I knew already, and I learned more about them through this more of a personal conversation, not a career or job oriented discussion. So thank you, Shannon, for creating this space for us to have this conversation and for others to have this conversation, because I'm learning a lot from them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. How do we take that all in? That was such a wonderful conversation. I feel so fortunate that we got to have this discussion together. And I really hope that you are leaving this chat feeling inspired and uplifted, and maybe even with some new perspectives that you can apply in your life. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share with a friend. Please also like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment. It really helps people find this podcast. And especially if you're listening in Apple Podcast or on YouTube. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week and see you next week.